unSILOed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.
Welcome to unSILOed. This is Greg LeBlanc, and I'm here today with Gene Kim and Steve Spear. It's the rare podcast with two co-authors as guests, right? And you guys co-authored this book called Wiring the Winning Organization, Liberating Our Collective Greatness through Slowification, Simplification, and Amplification. Gene is the chair of the Enterprise Technology Leadership Summit, and also the author of a whole bunch of books. Got this one, Accelerate, which was co-authored a couple years back. We've got the DevOps Handbook, which I couldn't find. I have it around here somewhere. And then you're also a novelist with the Phoenix Project and the Unicorn Project. One of my favorite novels, believe it or not. The Phoenix Project, fantastic. And then Steve is teaching at MIT Sloan. He's also at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement and the founder of a software company called C2Solve, and the author of this book here, The High Velocity Edge, How Market Leaders Leverage Operational Excellence to Beat the Competition. Welcome, Gene and Steve.
So great to be here, Greg. And I'm such an admirer of your podcast and just I had written to you just the breadth and the surface area of what you've covered, in this incredible thing that you've created.
Well, I have to say that the breadth that is covered in this book is pretty phenomenal. I think it was Winston Churchill, and you quoted him, where he said, we design our buildings, or we shape our buildings, and our buildings shape us. And I think that you could take that same logic and apply it to organizational design. And I teach a course on organizational design, and that's the message, that organizational design is incredibly important. And I think all of these books that both of you have written touch on organizational design. And this latest book is trying to show, I think, the connection between all of these different movements which are out there. I mean, I teach a course on digital transformation where I try to tie together lean startup, agile, and design thinking. But you notice, you mentioned, of course, that there are a whole bunch of other things, right? Like OODA loops and psychological safety and modularization and control theory. I mean, all of these things that we all think of as important and good, they're all sort of facets of what we might think of as good management in the 21st century. And the thing I really like about all of this work is the way in which you bring things back to basics. I remember used to think that if I were to ever write a book, it would be called Everything I Learned About Business, I Learned Working in a Restaurant. and in the examples that you guys use in this book, right, just moving a couch and refurbishing a hotel, I mean, they highlight how the software businesses, now all businesses are software businesses now, software businesses, they can learn from these basic operations concepts, which we learn in, talking about cranberries, talking about, moving couches and so forth. So I guess I'm wondering, do you find that there really is a unified field theory of organizational design? And if so, why don't we have sort of departments and courses that focus on this? Right? It's unclear where organizational design belongs in business schools or engineering schools. It kind of crosses so many different silos and domains.
Greg, in terms of grand unifying theory, short answer is yes. And the reason for that is that there's a common problem, which is across all organizations, regardless of sector, the science and engineering on which they depend, the market in which they operate. And that's the fact that we form organizations in the first place to allow people to collaborate and collaborate creatively on solving problems much bigger than themselves. And once we start realizing that everything else is just tools, mechanisms, artifice, context, environment in which collaboration is going on, then we have to start asking the question, what is it? What are the conditions that allow collaboration to be rich and effective and fruitful and rewarding and generative and all those other marvelous things? And what are the conditions in which that compromise people's ability to collaborate creatively through collective action towards common purpose? And once we realize that is the organizational design problem, then it's more reasonable to assert that there's actually a unifying theory around that, because it's one problem which cuts across situation.
Yeah, and I think it was such a great question going out. Maybe I'll mention three things. I think, yes, the idea that, in fact, let me just start all the way back. It's like 2002, and I remember reading this Harvard Business Review article called "Decoding the DNA of the Toyota Production System." And I was actually reading it with a friend of mine, actually a fellow co-author on the Phoenix Project, and we're just sort of marveling at the language and the proposition that everyone at Toyota is solving problems in the community as a community of scientists. We're like, oh my goodness, astonishing. And I think even back then, people in the what eventually became the DevOps community, they were tremendously influenced by the lean, the Toyota production process, and so forth. And I do remember thinking, my gosh, we have so much to learn from this community. I met Dr. Stephen Spear in 2014 when I took a workshop from him at the MIT Sloan School of Business, and it was just a mind-blowing experience. I mean, there was so much that I learned, and I would attribute a year of the lateness of the DevOps handbook to that. And I'm sure the editors would say that was the least of the problem, but that's something that it was certainly a problem. But I think 3-4 years ago we started working on just trying to answer two questions, like what's in common between all these things that look very different: lean, agile, DevOps, lean startup, Toyota Production System, resilience engineering, safety culture, etc. And how does it inform why organizations work the way they do, both in the ideal and not ideal? Mm-hmm. And kind of the two conclusions we came to was, one is that they are all incomplete expressions of a far greater but simpler whole, that there are certain kind of forces that must exist that enable high performance. And I guess the one other thing I would add is that, I think, when you say grand unified field theory, kind of reminds me of these kind of fringe, parts of mathematics where only a handful of people in the world can understand. And I think our aspiration was to say, hey, anyone can make something simple appear complex, but it's, it takes a bit more to sort of take something that's complex and make it reveal a simplicity. And that's what I'm hoping that the book achieves, showing that you can actually show all of these forces at work in simple problems like moving a couch, in renovating a hotel that has only 3 interdependent steps that explain so much of what we see, whether it's in software, hardware, engine design, design and operations of nuclear reactors, things that we see in the everyday news, that these can be explained by the presence or absence of some very simple mechanisms. And I guess the last thing I'll mention, just because I was so inspired by what you said before we started recording, was that if you take a look at the Venn diagram of to vastly oversimplify, I came from software, Steve came from hardware, or other domains, everything but software. You would think that the Venn diagram and overlap of what we've read is quite small, but it was actually large enough where we actually had this shorthand that we could quickly communicate and confirm that we had very much common belief systems and philosophies, and that led to just this incredible 3-4 year period of I've mentioned to many that this was the most intellectually challenging thing I've ever worked on, but also the most rewarding, just because I learned so much, but it was just revealed something that I now understand better, things I thought I understood, and I certainly understand better things that I would claim that I wish I understood better. How am I doing, Greg?
Well,
and Steve?
I'd like you guys both to dig into this idea of the 3 levels, because I oftentimes here in Silicon Valley, right? I mean, perhaps not as much in the 2 places where you guys live, but there are people that are coming here from all around the world, and they're like, hey, we want to learn the latest about technology. Tell us all about Gen AI, and tell us, all about these new tools. And they think that all they need to do then is just sort of adopt these new tools and they'll be well on their way. And I think what they're focusing on are the work objects, right? And the tools, and they're really emphasizing those 2, and they're kind of forgetting about the 3rd level, which in my view is the most important level. And I think you guys agree is the most important level, this social circuitry. And one of the messages that I try to tell people is, every company is going to be a software company. But after saying that for a couple of years, I realized that's not just true now. That has always been true, right? If we think about the software of the company as being the know-how and the communications and the interfaces, like it's been true for as long as we've had people working together. It's just that now we have software in ones and zeros, and before we had,
Right.
a different kind of software.
Yeah.
Yeah. Steve, can I take a real quick cut at this and just tee it up for you to
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, in fact, so Steve introduced this concept. I remember the call when this was introduced, and I was thinking, I'm not sure if this is so important. But some weeks later, I mean, he was absolutely right. He convinced me that he's absolutely right, and it was just this observation that there are three layers of which we work. One is sort of the technical object, the patient, the code in front of us, the binary, that's running in production. Layer two is the technology, the MRI machine, the CAT scanner, the IDEs, the Kubernetes platform, the generative AI platforms. But then layer three is the social circuitry of how we connect people and teams together. As Steve would say, the processes, procedures. Then I would also add the norms. Just how we work. And it is the socio part of the socio-technical system. And I think what's amazing to me is that whenever you have this longitudinal study like the NUMMI joint venture, the formerly worst performing automotive plant, not just in North America at General Motors, but around the globe. When Toyota reopened the plant with the same people, they had the same floor space, the same capital equipment, the same vendors, the same workers. The only thing that changed was the layer three management system. So everything at layer one and layer two were the same. And so it really reinforces the fact that the difference maker is in layer three. And so I'm rereading some of my favorite books, in leadership, business, and it just reinforces that what they're talking about are things in layer three, the good ones, right? The good books that endure are the ones talking about these layer three characteristics. And then, as you mentioned, we as leaders create the layer three architecture that we work within, and then forever after it shapes us. And so it just shows the responsibility that leaders have to create a system where everyone's able to work easily and well. Steve.
Yeah, it's 100%. So I'm working on something now with a guy named Scott, and the group of which we're part and peripherally part. We're not doing the real work. There's other people doing the real work. They're on the course to really profoundly changing the performance of the organization of which they're part. And when people say, well, what have you done? What have you done to make the changes? I think they're looking for some change in technology or change in what. And Scott's response is, we didn't do anything. We just changed our behavior. And they keep pushing because they want the magic at Glix or the silver bullet kind of thing. He says, no, we just changed our behavior. And what he's really talking to you is he's changing the behavior that allows a much richer, creative, collaborative effort towards common purpose. One thing, Greg, you were talking about every business becoming a software business. I would actually, it finally gives me the opportunity to say, well, every business is actually reverting back to becoming an industrial business. And what I mean by that, I've spent 30 years on this where I always feel that I and others like me who find great satisfaction in being places of industrial production, I think we're always looked down upon by people who sit there and clickety-clack all day on machines that were made in places of industrial production. It's like, oh, well, but the truth is, you think about it, what has really changed? Because, from the earliest days of humankind, what did people do is that they took something which was poorly understood. Someone came to some greater understanding than was had by his or her compatriots, and they coded it. And at first, perhaps they coded it as the skills of the craftsperson, and there was some means of transmission for that. And then eventually, it wasn't just what was in the minds of the craftsperson through their own personal hands. They created techniques that they could convey to apprentices and whatnot. And then there was a gradual evolution as we went through agricultural into industrial revolution of creating the American system of fixtures, jigs, and gauges. And what was that? It was a codification of the wisdom and the insight that the master had that was then usable by others. And the use of fixtures, jigs, and gauges then got coupled with assembly lines and that kind of thing. But again, what was happening was that individuals and collectives were able to make discoveries that then got repeatable. So when we talk about moving from the industrial age to the post-industrial age, I mean, fundamentally, still, what are we talking about? We're still talking about taking experiences, which at first are amorphous and vague and ambiguous, and finding structure. And then once we find the structure in the experiences, we try to find ways of representing that structure in a way that's codified so it's repeatable. And people have been at that forever. I mean, they've been at that forever. And if they hadn't been at that forever, then we'd be operating in wildly random ways. So anyway, thing long and short, we're not doing anything. Again, the layer one technology, the things we're acting on have changed. How we act on those things has changed, but how we act on them hasn't changed, because we're still human beings trying to solve very, very hard, sprawling problems with other human beings. We have to do that in a way that allows us to connect in a meaningful, more effortless, productive ways than not.
Yeah, I was trained as an historian, and so you might enjoy this, but when I start my digital transformation class, my first lecture is on the factory system. And usually when you ask people, right, what caused the Industrial Revolution, they'll typically say, it's the steam engine, right? And you go back to Adam Smith, and he doesn't say anything about a steam engine, right? He's talking about the reorganization of work and the creation of, right, the factory system, right, by creating specialization and linearization, and then also putting people in the same physical locations so that they can actually communicate up and down through the chain. And this same mistake, I think, that people made when trying to explain the first Industrial Revolution. They use the same mistake when trying to explain the current Industrial Revolution, right? And they fail to understand that what we're seeing is a radical change in management. I mean, maybe not a radical change, but just the rediscovery and reapplication of these insights, right?
Greg, I think that's brilliant. The factor, going back to the steam engine, what people overlook when they say, oh, well, the steam engine was critical. It's like, yes, and how did the steam engine emerge? It didn't just like one day you're walking along, it's like, damn, what's that big, huge belching thing in my way? A steam engine. Well, where did that come from? But actually, we know the steam engine had a history, which is building up over combinations of fire and boiling and pressurization, et cetera, to the point that you got a steam engine. It was the result of a flow of collaborative creativity over time that culminated in the steam engine, which then that in combination with other collaborative discoveries over time allowed for factories and the co-location of people. And with the co-location of people came the opportunity to do co-located collaborative problem solving on a much, much larger scale, in part because people could be in the same place and they weren't dependent on being where they were near rivers or whatever else. But the other thing is, now when they collaborated creatively, what was in their minds can now be expressed not only through their own brawn, but through things measured not in terms of human power, but horsepower and BTUs. But again, it's right on. It's that the steam engine was the product and then became the instrument of human collaborative creativity. And that's becomes the key point. And like you were asking before, why does it seem that this new book lends itself or sounds like proposing a unifying theory of organizations? Because again, above the technology, whether it's a product or a mechanism, is the collaboration and the coordinated collaboration of people trying to be creative.
Greg, can I add one thing, maybe just to sort of punctuate like why this is so needed, and I think kind of the mission for the book is that I think we sort of kind of explore the three axes of which kind of organizations must have to create these ideal conditions. One is everyone has what they need when they need it in the right format. Everyone's solving tough problems, ideally in parallel. They have independence of action, and that we have a systems that can amplify weak signals of failure so they can be decisively acted upon to detect, correct, and ideally prevent. So those are kind of the good parts. But let's just go to explore one corner of if we take two of those axes to the other side, which is that no one has what they need. And a friend of mine, he was describing how the top initiative for this telco is to put a checkbox in front of their 20 million customers so they can opt into a $5 a month service, from a third party, email, watch movies, etc. The trouble is it requires work from 20 different teams It requires CEO minus one level support, daily warm room meetings, $28 million. And worst of all, everyone gives it a 28% chance of success because the last 2 times they tried it, it failed. And so here, this is not a difficult problems at layer 1 and layer 2. This is purely a layer 3 problem where everyone's spending all the time communicating and coordinating and cajoling and scheduling and expediting and escalating and politicking and all those things that, is not where we want our people to be spending their most precious time. And so like what we assert in the book is it's really 3 mechanisms that shape how work is done, to enable people to do their work easily and well.
Well, I mean, I think you mentioned somewhere in the book that all work is knowledge work. And I think that's true. I mean, again, I worked in a restaurant. I was a busboy, right? I was a waiter. I was a, sous chef. And indeed, no matter how kind of menial the task, there is this knowledge that is being utilized, this knowledge that is being created, and this knowledge which is being shared. And if the flow of that knowledge is impeded, if there's frictions, if it's being wasted, then you've got problems. One of the things I wondered is, in the amplification part of the book, you talked about how these organizations can learn that there's a problem, right? So you can't do anything about a problem if you don't know about it. And there's one thing to know about critical failures. There's one thing to know about disasters and so forth. But just the everyday, like what you just described, this developer is trying to add a feature and they can't do it. I always wonder why it is that people at the highest level of the organizations oftentimes are so unaware of these difficulties and these frustrations and these coordination problems. And is that a feature or is that a bug? I mean, is there something about, what leaders think is important? I mean, do we have a view of leadership, which is, the superhero who comes in and motivates the troops and you have this idea of the hero, right? I think it was the Phoenix Project, right? Somebody who's rushes to the rescue. I mean, do we have this vision of leadership that is completely upside down?
Yeah. Yes. I can elaborate on that, but the answer is absolutely yes. So I'll take a couple of stabs at this because this is something very, very close to my heart. And I'll take a few stabs and try to keep them short because otherwise I'm just going to go off on a roll of rant. But to answer your question, do we have a view of leadership which is wrong? The answer is yes, it's wrong. The experience of the individual who does work to create value occurs with a speed, a frequency, a detail, and a necessary accuracy to get work done, which requires an overlay of information flow that captures the same speed, frequency, detail, and accuracy for that person's efforts to be harmoniously integrated and coordinated with the other people with whom they're trying to be co-creative. Once you start losing the fidelity to the speed, the accuracy, detail, and accuracy at which experience actually is had, for a whole host of reasons we explore in a very nerdy set of footnotes and asides and parentheticals in the book, you simply can't positively influence what's going on there. And you start thinking about a lot of the management systems most people experience. What it does is it takes all that speed, frequency, detail, and accuracy of experience and tries to distill it down to this fewer and fewer dimensionality of metrics, which become completely disconnected with what's actually occurring in the deck plate. And however you want to argue it, is that we give up all sorts of advantages in terms of our ability to you mentioned OODA loops early on. We give up our OODA loop advantage. We give up any kind of ability to synchronize and coordinate and collaborate because of trying to take information here, which exists, as I was saying, and bring it way up here where it can be understood and processed. Well, if you're trying to read information off of this very varied topography and then have it where it could be understood by some very few at a very removed level, you have to take away all the meaning. Once you take away all the meaning of what's coming up, then you can't possibly have any kind of relevance acting on down. One last thought in terms of leadership. You talked about the heroic leader. And somehow they can, unlike anybody else, have this rich and varied understanding of the topography and what's occurring on this rich and varied topography, and then give instructions that will somehow reconfigure effort in some better way. So in contrast, in wildly strong contrast, I was in a plant just a little back where arguably it's one of the best facilities in the world doing what it does. And we had a chance to speak to the new site president, give a sense of things. She's responsible not only for the 3,000 or so people who are directly and, for whom she's directly responsible because they're employed by the same organization. There's another 7,000 people on site at first-tier suppliers and thousands of others who support this facility. And someone said, "Oh, you're new to this job, Suzanne. What do you want your legacy to be?" And she said, "I don't want to have a legacy." She said, "I'm steward of a phenomenal management system that has all these phenomenal qualities in terms of creating conditions in which the individual can give full expression to their potential to be creative and contribute to this much larger whole. And I'm steward for this management system not only does that, but allows the individual efforts to mesh into this beautiful ballet of collective expression of genius." She said, "I want to make sure my stewardship doesn't harm that." She said, I don't want to have a legacy where people come back and say, "Oh, look at all the changes that Suzanne instituted." I want to make sure that when people look back, they said, while Suzanne was here, she left it as phenomenal as she found it. She was a phenomenal steward for this thing. She had temporary responsibility.
Greg,
that I don't think they teach in too many business schools.
Greg, can I concretize some of these things in terms of like the simple model we try to put forth to take these, ideas that are, I think we were all taught, but for us to try to convey that that these things have to be true. And so in the book, we have these kind of two vignettes. One is Steve and Jean moving a couch. And the reason why we chose that is that it's so easily dismissible as merely a brawn effort, no brain work needed. And yet Steve and Jean, they have to solve, some problems that are not so obvious, which is like, where's the center of gravity to get through a narrow doorway? Which axis do you rotate around to get through a narrow winding set of stairs?
I've done this.
Who should go first?
Times.
Yeah, right. Should that person go
Moved
forwards
a lot
or
of
backwards?
times in college.
Oh my goodness,
Right.
yeah, and the furniture only gets heavier and more delicate as you grow older, right? Is what I found, and yet they don't need consultants, they don't need focus groups. Just by picking up the couch, trial and error, fast feedback, but most importantly, some communication coordination. We can have some confidence that Steve and Jean will, achieve the goal. And yet, as leaders, there are all these things that we can do to make their job more difficult or maybe even impossible. Like, for example, we can turn off all the lights. The work will take longer. It will become more dangerous. They can damage the furniture, maybe even themselves. But they can also introduce another dimension of difficulty, which is, preventing or like a lot of background noise or like a siren, loud music, which is a different dimension of difficulty because it prevents or impedes Steve and Jean's ability to communicate and coordinate. In fact, we as leaders can even put in an intermediary and prevent Steve and Jean from talking directly with each other. And instead they have to go through work orders or, in our world, JIRA tickets or project managers or account managers or lawyers or compliance managers. And so under those conditions, it's not so easy to dismiss the fact that Steve and Jean might not be able to move that couch. And that's, I think, what happened in the DevOps movement is that the information, as Steve was alluding to, the information that needed to pass between dev and ops became so dense that it so far outstripped the communication channel between them, is that, that's how you end up with these cataclysmic deployments as depicted in the Phoenix Project. And so, the answer was to, put them side by side, work on the problem together. The couch is really a metaphor for joint cognition, joint problem solving. And so to me, I still marvel at the fact that we can even see these behaviors, these symptoms of problems, even in two people moving a couch. And so the second vignette is about, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Well, I was going to say,
Oh yeah.
you don't have a theory of power there. I mean, no, seriously. I mean, I remember when I was taking a course in central planning back in like 1991, and I learned that if you have a coal mine and a steel mill right next to each other, and they want to, I don't know, change the delivery schedule in the Ukraine, you had to go all the way up to the minister of ferrous metals, and then back over to the minister of carbon production, and it might take a month or 6 weeks to get that thing changed. And of course, this may have been, somebody might have thought this was a good idea at some point, but at some point it becomes all about the power of that person.
Yeah.
And so part of the reasons why we don't see optimal organizational design is in part because people engage in information hoarding, people engage in making themselves indispensable and stuff like that. You guys, the dark view of human nature is not a big part of this book, which is I don't, that's not a criticism, but that makes things even more complicated, I think, when you add that element.
Yeah.
in.
So, Greg, if I think your talk here it raises such subtle but wildly important points. So, to your point about the coal mine and the steel mill, it kind of reinforces something we discussed earlier, which is if you could have the direct connection between the steel mill and the coal mine, there's a lot of subtlety in that communication about what it is going on in the steel mill on that particular day that necessitates more or less coal of different types. In order to communicate to the far removed director of ferrous metal production, all of that very subtle information has to compress down to one or two metrics, which basically is how much when. And once that happens, the ability to engage the actual situation is fully lost. So very strong reinforcement of what we were discussing. There's another point you raised, though, which is why and for what reason are people accepting the title of leader? And one is it to get authority, or is it to accept responsibility? One of the things that has been profoundly transformative for me is the amount of time I've spent. Now it's over many, many years, and deeply immersed in a number of situations with folks in the military. And for many of our colleagues who come out of the bi-coastal educated elite, and I don't want to get all political,
of which you are both a part of.
Yeah, I'm just using cliche terms, right? But for those who don't interact with that world, they tend to think through stereotypes of the defense establishment as being leadership for the purpose of having authority. And one of the things that's been really striking to me over the many years is how many people actually thrive in that world because they view being in a position of leadership as accepting responsibility, and in particular, accepting responsibility for the well-being of other humans, other people. And taking it one step further, accepting responsibility for the well-being of other people, not only it has some element of it in a nurturing, caring way, but being responsible for the conditions these other people will encounter when they go to do the work they have to do. And over again, it's about accepting this responsibility. Anyway, when we start looking at these extraordinary organizations, like the one I mentioned with this new leader, Suzanne, before, those are people who are taking on leadership and with it willingly accepting responsibility for other people, as opposed to seeking it out so that they can have authority that they can wield over other people. Wildly different mindsets. And I'd argue actually wildly different moral frameworks and ethical frameworks.
Greg, and if I can map this back to one of your previous guests, Dr. Christina Maslach, and her work of burnout, right? I think one of the things that she said when I met her many years ago was that the job isn't to build more resilient canaries, the canaries in the coal mine, right? Instead, it's to take a more deeply skeptical look at like, what is it that the coal miners are doing that's killing all the canaries, and what does that mean, for the health of the system?
Well, Gene, I interrupted you because you were going to tell us the second story about the refurbishing the hotel.
Oh yeah. So the second vignette, I think our goal was to show an equally simple system where we could get it to demonstrate all the things that we see in kind of not so great management systems. And this is Steve and Jean now get tapped to help their spouses renovate an old Victorian hotel, so that they can run a not-for-profit out of it. And so really, this is the setup is that there's really 3 interdependent steps. You have to remove the furniture, paint the room, put the furniture back in. And Steve and Jean take up this cause thinking what could go wrong just doesn't seem so hard.
Yeah, how hard can it be?
How hard can it be, right? Jean sets up the painting silo, Steam sets up the moving silo, and within hours things go wildly wrong. Painters come in, furniture's still there. Movers come there, the painters are still painting, right? The walls are damaged, the furniture is damaged, nothing's getting done. Movers are mad at painters are mad at movers. They only agree on one thing, which is that Steve and Jean are not very good at their job, and their spouse are.
All you need is a Gantt chart, right? I mean, that's all you need.
Exactly. And there's all these kind of we go through the book and we start to dissect what's going wrong, and you point out this kind of astonishing thing, which is that even with this kind of slower moving process that isn't very consequential, that doesn't have very many functional specialties, even we can screw that up and get all these things that you would see happening in the Phoenix project and software work where everybody's late. The only effective way of getting people to do the right thing is by massive expediting and lots of reporting and re-estimation and so forth. And so just imagine how much we can screw up a more consequential system that's faster moving, where the work is more complex and you have scores of functional specialties like in a hospital or in software. And it really is meant to sort of, at the conclusion of presenting those 2 vignettes, we now have everything we need to be able to describe the 3 forces, the 3 mechanisms that must be in place in any high-performing system. You got to slowify, meaning we move the most difficult problems from production into planning and practice, where work can be redone. We can do experiments. We can learn. Where we can simplify, where we actually divide up the problems. We partition them so that they are easier to solve. And there's kind of 3 dimensions of that. And then there's amplification, this overlay of how do we create a system that can amplify even the weakest signals, so that when someone needs help or when there's danger, that we can quickly detect and correct, or ideally prevent from happening again. And for me, that was to be able to set the stage like that and articulate kind of parsimoniously, the most popular management systems, frameworks like Lean, Agile, Toyota Production System, to say they can all be traced back into one of those 3, or at least one of those 3 things.
Right.
Steve, how am I doing?
Each one of those 3 things is deserving of its own podcast. Maybe we can dig into them. Slowification. I mean, I have a finance background too, and so when I think of slowification, I think, and I remember when I learned this term, technical debt. The minute I learned the concept, it was immediate recognition, right?
Yeah.
Because and then you can apply it to organizational debt, and I forget who came up with that term, but the idea that if you're operating with, I guess, an implied high discount rate, then you're essentially kicking things down the road, right? Like you never actually fix your car, you just patch your car, right? And so your repair bills ultimately wind up being a lot more than if you just kind of fixed your car. I learned this German term Verbesserung, right? Great word. And so, I mean, what's the root cause of it? Is the root cause the KPIs that managers put on the individuals? Is it that it's difficult to measure the ROI associated with the pauses, with the learning activities, right? It's not output. It's something which is an investment in future output.
Yeah, I would offer, Greg, that life is dynamic, but many of our metrics are static. That when we construct metrics, they are rearward looking in terms of the ratios of amongst different things that went into or came out of an experience, and then we extrapolate those forward as if those ratios are hard written. But the reality is, life is dynamic. And we're constantly adapting to, and once we start adapting, our behavior to what's going on around us, and what's going on around us is adapting to us. We're no longer in a linear system where what happened can be projected easily forward. The other part is through those series of adaptations, our understanding of what's going on around us is evolving, as is what's going on around us. And so what I think a lot of these metric-driven organizations, the pit they fall into is they don't account for the return on investment of discovery. They measure they measure activity, but not accomplishment. So you can have, I'll give you a very particular example. I was doing work with a pharmaceutical company, and end of day, it just happened that people lined up to get onto a shuttle that took them to the train. And I was having conversations with colleagues about how we were undervaluing the opportunity to plan with rich feedback, practice with rich feedback before actually trying to execute. And bearing in mind what this facility was, it was an R&D facility where they were people purposely hired and self-selected into a situation where a lot was not understood, and they were there to give better understanding. Anyway, to prove that the bias towards what was activity versus accomplishment, we picked people who were online. There was the nice experiment set up. People were online to get on the bus. So we started by the door and just started working back and asking people, what did you do today? And wouldn't you know, most people's answers was an activity answer, not an accomplishment answer. The people said how many tests they had set up, how many different things they had synthesized, how many different lines of code they had written, how many reports they had generated, how many other metrics had been calculated. It was all what had been the activities done. When we asked people, though, what they had learned, what they had discovered, what they had accomplished, then they said, I hadn't really thought about that, but let me tell you. What they had accomplished had nothing to do with the number of lines of code they had written, the number of molecules they had synthesized. It was the insights they had gotten. The reason I bring up that story is that facility with all the PhDs and multiple PhDs and advanced degrees that were in there, it was created for accomplishment. It wasn't created for activity. The work that was done was on such a small scale relative to commercial need that activity was completely the wrong way to measure the success on a day. Nevertheless, that's how people had been socialized, to measure their success on the day by what the activity they had done and not what they had actually accomplished in terms of discovery. Which I think ties back to what you were asking, which is if an R&D facility, which is literally existing on the cutting edge of the most advanced science and technology, is the people in it are thinking in terms of their activity, not their accomplishment, what about the rest of us? We're even more stuck just by inclination in thinking that way.
I'll just expound on that. On just maybe two things come to mind. One is, I would just go back to the interview you had with Dr. Gary Klein, and he said, expertise is all about experience, and then how you use that to inform kind of like how we do the most dangerous and highly consequential work. And one of the things that Steve said to me that just was just one of the many sort of searing aha moments, insights was, whenever you see someone doing something highly consequential, with high outage cost or high amounts of danger, they had to have invested in planning and practice, because if every mistake you die, well then no way that you could have gotten that good without investing in planning and practice. And so I think what goes counter to that is the notion of operating tempo, which came up earlier in this conversation, is those best leaders are willing to make that short-term investment for a longer-term gain. That missing word, the reason why we had to create the word slowification, is that we have a lot of adages for slow down to speed up, or stop sawing to sharpen the saw. Are in the absence of that word, are kind of like he, ha ha, things. Maybe our inability to say it prevents us from doing it or thinking it, and so thus making up the word. But the whole notion is that by creating time to be able to solve tough problems, not in production, but in planning and practice, to solve architectural problems, not during the normal sprint or what have you, but actually making time for the architectural spike or the technical, the period of technical debt reduction to enable people to do their work easy and well, that has to be supported by leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think I stole this concept from you, Gene, but I use this in some of my lectures, and it's been distorted, I'm sure. But I talk about, planned work, unplanned work, right, or firefighting, and then I talk about kind of test and learn, and then sort of strategic thinking, and so I ask executives when I meet them, like, hey, audit your time and see how much time are you spending on these 4 activities, and almost all of them, the planned work is 9 to 5, and then the unplanned work lands on top of it, and the other 2 stuff, that stuff just gets squeezed out, right? And I mean, how do people resist the pressure to fill their calendars and their time clocks with the first 2 activities?
Steve, can I set up the story because I think and then I would just love for you to sort of tell the story of the counter example. I mean, so in the Wiring the Winning organization, there's 24 case studies, of which I think 20% are technology related. The one with the most case studies in it has come from the healthcare profession, just because I think it's so easy to see, especially in hospital settings. And there's this heartbreaking story about what happened to Miss Morris versus Miss Morrison. The notion that this is an example of the wrong patient being operated on, despite 14 signals that the wrong patient was going to be operated on, including the patient saying you've got the wrong patient. And so these were all situations where someone the system was clearly out of control, yet the operating tempo kept things going, resulting in this dangerous surgery on the wrong person. But the counter example is when management deliberately slowifies and reconfigures the system so that it can better prevent, detect, and correct. And Steve, there's a narrative that's just so wonderful about what happens when the right leader is put into a similar situation to reduce the number of C-labs, right, Steve?
Right. Yes. So the reference Gene is making is in healthcare. When we first started looking at healthcare and the just horrific number of adverse events that were happening, which had nothing to do with the patient. And that's often the excuse. Well, we treat sick people. Yes, but just because you treat sick people doesn't mean that when they're in your care, they should fall downstairs or fall out of bed, right? Mm-hmm. It was called avoidable harm, nosocomial events. And when we started looking at these, what we discovered, this goes back to about 2000 when this became a real topic of interest in the healthcare community, and system failure became a real concern, was that if you wanted to look at situations and why they failed, it's because little problems didn't get dealt with while they were still little, and they were allowed to become big problems. And that's a phraseology I take away from.
This is the amplification piece.
This is the amplification, which is amplify the little things before they have a chance to become big. For what it's worth, outstanding organizations are obsessive about amplifying the little things before they become big. Now, and I just wanted, as an aside, make a quick, it's semantic clarity on this one. You could say that you can have a lot of little problems and only some will become big. But the key point about saying, well, we're obsessive about seeing and solving little problems before they become big is not seeing and solving the ones that might become big. It's just seeing and solving all of them because you simply don't know. Right. And there's no filter on like, oh, well, I'll solve this one or this one or this one, but not this other one. It's like, I don't know which little one's going to become big. So I just have to have the capability of solving them all. I just want to have that as it's an important parenthetical. As far as what Gene's reference, what we found in healthcare is that the organizations that weren't obsessive about solving little problems would get clobbered, or more significantly, their patients and their staff would get clobbered by the ones that did have the chance to escape and become big. So a colleague, Rick Shannon, was charged with responsibility for the cardiac critical care unit at Allegheny General Hospital in the Allegheny County in Pittsburgh. And Rick took to heart fully this idea that if we can see and solve little problems, then we'll avoid the big ones. The problem state he grew concerned about initially was infections that took advantage of patients having central lines, which are
Mhm.
catheters put through various parts of the circulatory system. And you can imagine people were looking for the sort of the if not the silver bullet, the silver line catheter that would prevent these infections, and there was none. But what Rick got with his colleagues is said, look, we got to look for the little problems. And the little problems included residents who are doing a rotation through on a nighttime and not knowing how to do a subclavian insertion, which is more difficult but safer. They went for a femoral insertion, which is easier but dirtier. So they said, oh, that's it seems right now a little problem, but let's get some training on that, or let's work with our scheduling to make sure the person who hasn't been trained isn't alone, unsupported on night shift. They found other little problems. Nurses being unable to tell whether or not a site was showing potential for infection, so they changed the bandaging. Long and short, they made some 42 some odd different changes in how lines were placed, how lines were maintained. Net, they eliminated the infection risk. And how was it? By focusing on little things. Now, Rick Shannon has turned this obsessiveness about seeing and solving little problems before they have a chance to become big. So when he was in Allegheny County, the central line approach that he took at Allegheny General Hospital spread throughout the county, and throughout the county, for a period, they had eliminated central line infections, and Allegheny County was the safest place in the country to get a central line. Rick carried this over from that. He said, well, little problems are little problems. It doesn't matter the particular type. So ventilator associated pneumonia, they got rid of that. Patient falls, they got rid of that. And all sorts of other complications. Anyway, I just want to give a shout out to Rick Shannon, because he's become somewhat a prophet for this approach of see and solve little problems before they have a chance to become big. And it doesn't matter the problem. So he took it from Allegheny County to the University of Pennsylvania with great effect, to University of Virginia to great effect. And now he's at Duke University Health Systems, proselytizing on exactly the same approach. Make sure that you and your colleagues have this widely distributed, obsessive, passionate commitment to seeing and solving little things, and you won't suffer big things. And the proof is in the theory, and also the proof is in the empirical experience.
Greg, I'm so sorry. Can I add 90 seconds for a technology example, just to show that the same sort of philosophy and practices show up in the work that we hang out in so often. And so like two of the case studies were about like how is it that Amazon and Google have these unprecedented world-class reliability, and it's not by accident. It is by finding out, seeking problems, sources of vulnerabilities, and then not just fixing them, but testing them in production. And so the kind of crazy things they do to simulate, massive disasters at scale.
Yeah, I mean, it's like IKEA will test out the sofa like a million times, but they before they sell it, right? So it's the same idea.
No, exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. And so my favorite example in the book on this was the disaster incident recovery team, how they simulated key engineers being abducted by aliens because they noticed that a potential single point of failure is only a certain engineer knows how to execute a certain recovery process. So you got to take them out of the simulation and then remediate for that.
Yeah. I mean, so this is kind of like Alcoa, right, with its safety culture. I mean, is the idea that if maybe as a leader, you start with one sort of problem, and if you can figure out a way to solve that problem, it will serve as a model for other types of problem solving, right? So if you start with the central line, then and you figure out a way to reduce those accidents and injuries, then this will be a transferable systemic skill that you can apply to problem identification and solution.
Yeah, Greg, if I'll pick that up, because I had really the good fortune of being the mentor of and I'd say friends with Paul O'Neill, who was the chairman of Alcoa for about a 20-year period, really one of the blessings in my life. And the approach Alcoa took on workplace safety, and just to the punchline, they went from a very dangerous place, which you would expect when you're dealing with crushing forces and burning forces and caustic chemicals and all of that. They went from that to almost perfect workplace safety, and far and away the safest employer in the United States. And how did they get there? They got there by creating the practices that allowed people, when they saw a little problem, the need to duck or jump or whatever else, to call it out so the little problem could be solved before it became the big problem of personal injury and physical harm. Now, tying that back is that Alcoa started with problems which were largely technical, which was this machine is acting in a way we don't fully understand, and so we have to call it out while it's still a little problem before the machine does harm to somebody else. What Alcoa realized is that exactly the same obsessiveness about seeing little problems applied not only at that layer one of objects, this thing is acting badly, or instrumentation, the thing through which we work on that object, it actually applied to the processes by which individual effort meshed together into collective action. And so that speaks to the beauty of Alcoa's experience and its accomplishments. During the period that it became the safest employer in the country, despite the high risk, high hazard nature of its physical processes, its profitability also went off the charts, and its quality and its yield and everything else went off the charts. And I think when we looked at this, it was just a few years into its expansion from looking at layer one, layer two problems, objects and instrumentation, to the collaborative, coordinative processes, that in the first few years, Alcoa saved some $700 billion against $13 billion in revenue by seeing the little problems in its coordinative efforts that allowed it to get higher yield, higher quality, higher productivity, et cetera, et cetera. And then 3 years later, they repeated exactly the same huge gain of another $700 million in recurring savings against the same revenue. So, the Alcoa story is very consistent with the one Gene was telling about Google and Amazon and Apple, and the story we're telling also before about Rick Shannon, in contrast to a lot of the legacy practices in healthcare.
Well, I think it was in the High Velocity Edge that you came up with this: see a problem, solve a problem, and share the learning. And one of the things I have my executives do is I say, look, if you see a problem, who do you tell, right? Is there anybody to tell? You see a problem in the cafeteria. Is there somebody to tell? You see a problem on the website. Is there somebody to tell? And most people, when they see a problem, they don't know what to do. They don't know who to tell, right? The organization doesn't say, here, you see a problem, do this. And I always wondered, is that an organizational design problem, or is it a cultural problem? Or is that a false dichotomy, right? So, one of the things that I do in one of my lectures, I talk about the difference between an idea-driven organization and a complaint-driven organization, and I argue that if the organization is complaint-driven, then it will try to drive down complaints, and the best way to drive down complaints is to not respond to them, right? And so is the absence of an obvious mechanism for identifying problems driven by the desire to avoid them because they're getting in the way of what people are trying to do? Why is it that organizations sometimes turn off their smoke detectors, so to speak?
Yeah. So I'll take a stab at this one. Earlier we were talking about leadership and whether you're seeking leadership to have authority or accepting leadership to have responsibility. The authority seeker is someone who may not necessarily want to be on the receiving end of people's complaints. Because what is a complaint really saying is that you as leader have created conditions for me as someone for whom you're responsible. You've created conditions which are suboptimal or imperfect. And I'm telling you that what you've done needs fixing. Now, the person who's a leader by choice to accept responsibility actually has to have thick skin to accept that exact same message, but it's actually an important message to get because they accepted leadership because they wanted to accept responsibility for the well-being of other people. And so only by knowing what's wrong can they make those conditions better, so that the people for whom they're responsible are actually having better experiences. Just as a side plug here, you mentioned we founded a software company to make exactly that possible. But here's the point, and it actually speaks to layers 1, 2, and 3, is that I think we created, really great software. So the person who's far removed from the person who's actually responsible for that person can actually call out a situation. It's totally useless, though. With a qualifier, let me put that on before my colleagues kill me. It's totally useless for those who sought leadership for the purpose of having authority. because they don't want to hear anyway. So you could have the most elaborate or sophisticated software. It won't help at all. It's only helpful for those people who sought leadership because they wanted to accept responsibility for others. And this thing is actually a good thing because they can hear earlier and more often problems while they're still littler and solve them before they have an opportunity to get bigger. But anyway, I think, Greg, to your larger point, yes, there's a distinct difference. It's a difference of choice. And again, it gets back to the choice of why did I seek leadership in the first place?
And one of the things that I'd love to do is just maybe even reframe that problem. I mean, is it an idea? Is it idea generated, complaint driven, cultural? Dr. Ron Westrom, famous sociologist, studied patient safety, nuclear reactor safety, aviation safety. He's described organizational performance is about information flow and created sort of like 3 cultures that we describe in the Accelerate book. And we find that that's actually one of the top predictors of performance. And he characterized organizations as either pathologic, bureaucratic, or generative, and they all have certain norms. But I think there's how we describe that in the book. I think it has the same explanatory power, and we describe it because Dr. Ron Westrom, he described the problem with culture and discussion of culture is that it is ethereal and gossamer, right? His words, right, which make it very difficult to sort of like if you can't see it, how do you debate it and change it? And so our treatment in the amplification section is how Dr. Claude Shannon, the progenitor of information theory, treats it, which is that these are all signals that must be generated, transmitted, most importantly, received, and then acted upon, and then, the fix verified. And I love this because it's not only has the same explanatory power of Dr. Ron Westrom's work, but it's more easily diagnosable. And so now we can say, is this a signal generation problem? No one knew. Was a transmission problem where like you can't transmit, otherwise your messengers of bad news are shot. Is this a receiving problem, as Steve was alluding to, where it's like there's some jerk who doesn't really want to hear bad news and the message will never get received? Is it a prioritization issue? Is it a verification issue? And I think this recast the problem is something that we as engineers are we have the skills and instincts of how to solve a problem like that, where something that's gossamer and ethereal is a little bit more elusive.
Yeah, I love this example. You said that diabetes, right, can be divided into, right, the type 1, which is a failure to signal, and type 2, which is a failure to react to the signal. I just did a whole podcast on that, and you summarized the whole podcast in like one sentence. Amazing. Now, the one part that we haven't really discussed that much is the simplification piece. And I actually think this part is really the richest. It has so much in there, right, about partitioning and modularization and linearization, incrementalization. I mean, again, each one of those 3 things you could do a whole podcast on. And this whole concept of modularity, I mean, this concept is so powerful. And I've been teaching the kind of, remember the Jeff Bezos memo, right?
Yeah.
And how, I mean, if there was a Nobel Prize for management, that Jeff Bezos and Andy Jassy would get it for this memo. And it's so rich, understanding the importance of modularization and standardized interfaces. And I was wondering, I mean, that's really important in the software world, but it's also important in the restaurant world. It's important in the universities, right? We're cranking out students and sending them off into the world. I mean, we have a lot to learn about production from that insight, right?
So we talked about slowification. That's moving work temporally from kind of production into planning and practice. We talked about amplification, this kind of how do we treat the system as an information problem. And the third is partitioning work so they are smaller, easier to solve, less intertwined, where problems don't ripple out through the entire system, like is so prone in highly coupled systems. Instead, they're contained and localized. And there's really 3 dimensions of which we can do that. One is incrementalize. So that's like going from waterfall to agile processes. How do we sort of bound the how do we bound the novelty, from all at once into small batches? The second one is modularization, which it turns out that, the scholar who codified this the best is Dr. Carlos Baldwin, who was Steve's advisor back in the
We've got a
day.
new book coming out this year.
I know,
Volume
in
2.
like 2 months, right?
Yeah.
Only 20 years late. But it's so great. We're just corresponding with her. But just what happened, what so famously happened at Amazon, where the rate of kind of deployment slowed down from hundreds of deployments a year down to tens of deployments a year, where most deployments didn't even finish because something went wrong. That led to that famous Jeff Bezos memo that said, well, the kind of the landmark event was when, as CTO, he's still the CTO there, Werner Vogels. He said, we ended up in a ridiculous situation in the early 2000s where the Amazon digital teams, so that's like Kindle and movies and music, their customers still required to put in their physical shipping address, even though there was nothing to fulfill. But because they had the number of product categories went from 2 to 13 to 30 to 35. They had to go to 60 different ordering teams and beg them to sort of like change the ordering process, to which they said, we haven't budgeted for it, sorry. Yeah. And they were stuck, just like in the checkbox project from before. So that's what led to that sort of decisive Jeff Bezos memo that said teams can only communicate and coordinate through these APIs. That led to going from tens of deployments a year to hundreds of thousands of deployments per day, which is just astonishing. And I think for me, what was so astonishing to learn was that there's actually one more category. You got incrementalized, you got modularized, and then there's linearized, which is what the Toyota production system, or at least one part of the Toyota production system, is for sequential processes. It does for sequential interdependent processes what modularization does for parallel processes. And the characteristics are still the same, that they both create independence of action that allow teams to work independently of each other. So in Amazon, it was the development teams, that can now do 136,000 deployments a day. Whereas in our world, in linearization, it's in the CI/CD pipelines, the continuous integration deployment pipelines, that decouple the developer from the build engineer to the security engineer to the ops engineer, so they can all work independently with each other. So it was just kind of this, for me, I can't overstate just how much of a searing insight that was. Steve, how am I doing?
Fantastic. Gene, Greg, what this gets back to is, our basic premise. So there's this paradox, and I was saying the other day, I'm fascinated by the number 4, and this goes back to the first work back in the 80s, comparing within the auto industry that everyone had more or less, most everyone, on any given day, they had their resources in and their outputs out 1-to-1, and then there was that handful of plants that half in, twice out, so a ratio of 4 times. And it ties back to something you were saying earlier, Greg, about the factory system. Is the factory exists to allow people to collaborate and coordinate and be creative together. And yes, it results in productivity around pins or anything else, which is multiples, if not orders of magnitude, greater than having poor coordination and collaboration. But the point is the coordination, collaboration. Now, tying this over to Amazon and these APIs, one of the things that I found remarkably telling of Genius was, somewhere along the way, Amazon became noted for its 2 pizza teams. That team should solve, no team should be bigger than a team that could be fed comfortably by 2 pizzas. And it turns out that actually, Gene, correct me if I'm wrong on this, the 2 pizza team motif preceded the invention of the API. And what it suggests is that within Amazon, they realized, as many realized, the scale, the complexity of the system problems that they had to solve. They also recognized the difficulty of trying to get coordinated collaboration across many, many, many people. And when they, probably through some empiricism, said, well, how many people could actually reasonably collaborate? They probably said about the number of people could be fed by 2 pizzas, because fewer than 2 pizzas, you probably don't have enough people in the room to have the cross-functionality and the shared perspective. But more than 2 pizzas, you probably have too many people to get any kind of smooth ballet-like collaboration coordination. And then they said, okay, well, if 2 pizzas is about the size of a coherent team, bigger than that is awkward and spastic, and smaller than that is just incomplete, then we have to build technology that allows 2 pizza teams to use it and as the instrumentation, but also use it as the object. And out of that grew the APIs. So it was not the technology design and then say, oh, that allows two pizza teams. It was the two pizza teams is the stricture, and then the technology had to follow on that. Yeah, phenomenal. It was, and again, it ties back to what we're saying, Greg, is that the whole reason we form organizations in the first place is to allow collaboration and coordination amongst creative people, and that the winning organizations have leaders who've accepted responsibility for those people and create the conditions in which collaborative creativity can flourish. And it just so happens that two pizzas is a good metric for whether you've succeeded in that or not.
Well, this takes us back to where we started, which I think has to do with isomorphism and Conway's law, right? And this idea that the organizational architecture has to match the technology, right? There has to be a fit between what you're doing and how you're doing it. And I always think that it's the technology that is, technology's changing, and so organizations have to change with it. But I think you're suggesting that it's really a two-way feedback loop, right? Where the technology and the organizations co-evolve.
What a beautiful word.
If there's a mismatch, then you're going to have a dysfunctional, underperforming organization, right?
That's right. Yeah, we in the book we cite multiple times Kim Clark, who is formerly dean at the Harvard Business School, and before that, really a renowned researcher in the area of technology and operations management, and co-author on these books about modularity design rules with Carlos Baldwin. And Kim, in his early work, talked exactly about that, about the coevolution of the structure of organizations and what was called the dominant architecture of the things that they were designing and producing. And later work talked about the rupture, the loss of isomorphism between the organizational structure and the product. And where the isomorphism was so important was the product itself had a topography of technical problems that had to be solved. And the organization, by its structure determined who was in communication with whom about what, when, with what ease and facility and productivity. And the coevolution of the technology with the organizational structure, this isomorphic coevolution, allowed the right mapping of concentration of organizational resources with the concentration and severity of technological problems. What happens is as the organizational structure calcified, and as the technology continued to evolve, the organization didn't continue to co-evolve, and there was this rupture, the loss of isomorphism and the loss of ability of the organization because of its structure to solve technological problems. What's rare, and there are examples, but there aren't many, of organizations which are so obsessively worried about this loss of isomorphism because they're concerned about the loss of their ability to solve hard problems quicker and easier than otherwise, that they actually continue to co-evolve. And then if you look at the organizational structure today, it's actually considerably different from what it was 5 and 10 and certainly 15 years ago. And that's why not only did they create a competitive advantage for themselves through the strength of their problem-solving ability, but they've sustained that competitive advantage because their problem-solving ability continues to be expressed through this evolving structure to match the evolving technology for which they're responsible.
Greg, can I add one thing just to give another technology example? So the reason why I love that couch metaphor is that, again, it has a lot of explanatory power, because if we were to take that Amazon 2001 situation, it is as if 3,500 software engineers were all coupled to one couch, right? No one had independence of action. Small things required communicating, coordinating with scores or hundreds or thousands of other people, so no one could get any work done. So the countermeasure was to partition the couch into many small pieces to regain independence of action. Love it. But there's a counterexample that also comes up at Amazon which seems mutually contradictory, but can also be explained. Amazon Prime Video, they put out this kind of notorious blog post last year that said they went from microservices, right? To microservices to monolith, right? Exactly.
Yeah, monolith. Going back to monolith.
Right. And so it is as if they over partitioned the couch because by doing that, they were spending all their time coordinating and in transport, copying things in and out of storage buckets, which is actually really expensive. And so by gluing everything back into a monolith, you regained coherence and locality so that, you could do things without copying data back and forth. So I just love these kind of simple metaphors to explain, vastly what look like contradictory situations.
Right.
I thought they were moving back to monolith because the pace of change in that area had slowed down. That they were, in a place where they could rinse, wash, repeat a little more.
No, totally right. Yeah. To riff with you, they used initially AWS step functions as a way to prototype, and then it got productionized at massive scale. And it turns out that not only did the rate of change and the patterns become better known, but then the biggest problem became transport. And so thus the need to sort of take 95% of the cost out is by switching back to a monolith so that it can preserve locality. Just incredible.
Well, look, last question I have for you is management education. Management education is always a little bit behind. It's sort of the nature of the beast, the way the research cycles work and so forth. But if we want to have good managers, I was joking with you earlier that a good manager is someone who can sit at the interface between the technology and the business side of things. But do they need to be organizational engineers? I mean, is that really what the modern manager is? Or I guess all good managers have always been organizational engineers, but is that how they should think of themselves? Leaders, of course, but leaders as organizational engineers. And if that's the case, do they also need to lean into this Nyquist-Shannon theorem and figure out how to design this organization that'll sample frequently enough so that it can re-engineer the organization at the right tempo?
Yeah. So yes, let me unpack that. So one of the you mentioned early on that in the book we have this Venn diagram which talk about these various practices and movements: lean, agile, DevOps, re-engineering, Six Sigma, things, et cetera, and how they overlap. Common across most of them, and certainly the contemporary ones, is this issue of the need for feedback to inform agility to allow not convergent evolution, but continuous evolution. And more and more is that management is less about deliberative analytics and more about experiential discovery. One of the fathers of the lean startup thinking, Steve Blank, first at Berkeley, now at Stanford, one of his catchphrases is, "You got to get out of the building." Why is that? Because when you're in the building, the only thing you have access to is data you already have and mental models that you've already formed. But you're trying to find your way in a part of the world which may not have existed, and even if it existed, it's not familiar to you. So you're in the building, you're stuck with data, you're stuck with what you know, but you have to get out of the building to have these additional experiences to add to your data repository and increase the richness of your interpretive models. And that becomes a common issue. You were asking about how we educate managers. So one is what is the content we educate them on, and certainly a more exploratory versus deliberative set of mindsets and behaviors for sure. The idea back to Claude Shannon and Nyquist Shannon Weaver. Claude Shannon has a lot of hands in this. Is that you have to distribute this capability of seeing and solving problems, of making sense. Taking advantage of these very local OODA loops versus alone. As Gene well knows, I'm hardly the kind of person who becomes enraptured by technology when it appears, but I'll actually say technology gives us great advantages in terms of management education, because management education, when it had to be live in person, invited a push batch production approach. Someone signed up, they showed up for a year or two We told them based on what our preconceived notions were, what they had to learn. They had to learn it all at once, all together. And now, because we can do education at a distance, we can do asynchronous education. We can have education which is interspersed with either structured experiences or just natural experiences that people have. We can now actually teach in a much more one by one, as needed, as ready situation, where information is pulled from the instructor to time and place and situation where it's needed, rather than being forced by the instructor in a formulation that the instructor thinks is right, but it may have nothing to do with the readiness of the student. So I think we're in a situation where we can change not only what we teach, but how we teach. And if we get it right, we'll have more and more people thinking about managing this way and accepting responsibility, not only accepting responsibility, but actually having the capability to well shape the conditions in which those for whom they're responsible, those conditions in which they exist every day. And that would be certainly for, a contribution towards the betterment of society.
Greg, can I respond by maybe help I'm looking for, advice I'm looking for? I think I was kind of writing down some notes because that was such a great question. I would say the help the help we are looking for, Steve and I have had numerous conversations about this, is how do we recognize that we are all doing the same thing, and we are the community of leaders, educators, academics, who are all trying to figure out, how do we, create the conditions that help us push the frontiers of performance, what's in software, industry, generative AI, and so forth. And, I think part of that is creating a community of some things, right? But I think the most important part of a community is you all have to agree that you're all part of the same community, right? You're all at the same party, not just a bunch of people who just happen to be in a room at the same time.
Right.
And so, I think something that we've discussed, brainstormed, and have wondered about is like how do we, especially among the educator community, especially as you said, you are the people minting new leaders, who self-selected, to invest their precious time, to gain the skills to make a bigger impact on the world. How do we arm them with a way to sort of say, regardless of what school you come from? I was part of the ITIL community, then the theory of constraints community. We're all famously parochial, right? We didn't like the lean people. We didn't like the we were scared of the DevOps people, right? How can we say, hey, these are all communities where common mechanisms are being used to achieve a greater goal? And maybe a piece of that is that both Steve and I, we have books that are being taught in academia, whether it's the High Velocity Edge or the Phoenix Projects Accelerate. I mean, one of the things that we would just love advice and help on is how do we reframe that as part of something bigger but also simpler, right? And say this is actually, there's a simpler set of forces at work. There's a simpler way to explain what all these things are teaching, that are teachable. You don't have to be born with them, right? These are all inherently teachable things. How am I doing, Steve, Greg?
Well, I don't have an answer to that, but I've thought long and hard about what the new model for business education might look like, and it certainly would look more like a SaaS product. I mean, at Berkeley, we've got the Haas School, and I always thought, wow, wouldn't it be great if we branded ourselves as Haas as a service, and we made it something that you could, access with a spigot, and we had operating system and apps, and we had continuous updating and deployments, a couple thousand deployments a day and that sort of thing. But we're a long way off. Until then, I'm just going to have this book, Wiring the Winning Organization, as one of the textbooks that I have for my class. So, Gene, Steve, thanks so much for joining me, and hope we'll chat again soon.
Oh, this is so delightful. Thank you so much for having us on, Greg.
Greg, thank you so much.
unSILOed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.